What if one lie could erase your future, without you ever being allowed to defend yourself? My name is Pamela. I'm 25 years old, and I grew up in the kind of town where people smile at you in public and decide who you are behind closed doors. And in a place like that, once a lie sticks, there's nowhere to run. Everything unraveled the day my parents decided I needed to be taught a lesson. It didn't start with anything dramatic, just a normal argument. I was working part-time, saving every dollar so I could finally move out. That job paid my phone bill, my bus pass, the money I was counting on to leave. One afternoon, my mother accused me of taking cash from her purse. I hadn't. I tried to explain. I asked her to check again. I begged her to listen. But my father had already decided I was lying. He looked at me and said, calmly, like this was reasonable, "If you think you're so grown, let's see how you survive on your own." I thought he meant emotionally. I didn't realize he meant economically. A week later, my manager pulled me aside at work. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just said they were going in a different direction. No warning, no explanation. I packed my locker in silence, my head buzzing, telling myself it was fine. I'd find something else. I didn't know my parents had already started moving. They didn't call one place. They called everywhere I applied. Sometimes before I even showed up, they walked into businesses, made phone calls, spoke gently, convincingly. They told people the same thing again and again, that I couldn't be trusted, that I stole, that hiring me would be a mistake. At first, I didn't connect the dots. I applied everywhere. Cafes, offices, retail stores. Interviews went well. Smiles, handshakes, "We'll be in touch." Then silence. One interviewer slipped, just a sentence. "We heard some concerns about your honesty." My stomach dropped. I confronted my parents, shaking, angry, scared, desperate. My father didn't deny it. He crossed his arms and said it was for my own good. That humiliation would make me obedient, that this would teach me respect. Then he repeated the sentence, slower, like he wanted it burned into me. "Maybe now you'll learn." That's when I understood something terrifying. They weren't just punishing me. They were erasing me. I thought losing one job was bad. I didn't realize my name was already being passed around town, or that someone had warned them years earlier exactly how to do it. Weeks passed, then months. At first, I treated the rejections like bad luck. Everyone gets turned down sometimes. I stayed polite. I stayed calm. I kept applying. But over time, something became impossible to ignore. The silence wasn't random. I'd walk into places where I'd interviewed just days earlier, and the energy had changed. Smiles tightened. Conversations ended faster. A few people didn't come out from the back. It felt like decisions had already been made, like I was being recognized, not met. Once, in a grocery store aisle, I heard my name. It stopped when I turned the corner. That's when money started to disappear. First the extras, then the essentials. I stopped taking the bus and walked everywhere to save fare. Nights became math, how long I could stretch what little I had left. I learned exactly how many meals I could make from a single bag of noodles. I wasn't falling apart. I was shrinking my life to survive. Friends noticed. Then they drifted. In a town like ours, rumors don't just reach employers. They reach dinner tables, living rooms, church steps. Some people believed the story. I could see it in the hesitation, the careful distance. Being watched changes how you breathe. The only person who never treated me differently was my grandmother. She never asked questions. She just listened. Before she passed, she told me something I didn't understand then. "No matter what they say about you, remember who you are." At the time, it sounded like comfort. Now it felt like preparation. By the time I turned 25, nearly 2 years after that first job, I was exhausted. Hope had started to feel expensive. Then the phone rang. A company just outside town wanted to interview me. I almost didn't answer. Still, I borrowed a blazer, ironed it carefully, and practiced answers in the mirror. I told myself it was just another interview. Walking into that building, I didn't feel hopeful. I felt watched, like something long in motion was about to surface. I thought this was just another interview. I didn't know someone inside already knew my name. The interview started normally. The HR manager asked standard questions. Education, availability, work ethic. She nodded, took notes, smiled at the right moments. I answered automatically, already bracing for the part where everything would quietly collapse. I waited for the hesitation, for the look away, for the polite ending. Instead, the door opened. A man in his early 50s stepped inside, calm, unhurried, the kind of presence that changes a room without announcing itself. The HR manager stood immediately. "This is our CEO," she said. He wasn't here for interviews. That much was clear. My heart dropped, not from fear but recognition. Not of him, but of the moment. Something was happening out of sequence. He didn't sit right away. He looked at me for a long second, not the assessing stare I was used to, not suspicion. Something closer to familiarity. Then he said, "Before we continue, there's something I need to give you." He reached into his briefcase and placed an envelope on the table between us. It was old, thick, yellowed at the edges, sealed. My name was written on the front in handwriting I knew instantly. My grandmother's. For a moment, the room stopped making sense. She had been gone for years. I hadn't said her name. I hadn't mentioned my family. No one had asked. My hands hovered over the envelope. I didn't open it yet. I just stared at it, feeling everything from the last 2 years press into my chest at once. The rejections, the whispers, the watching. The CEO sat down then. He didn't rush me, didn't explain. He just said quietly, "She asked us to wait until you were ready." Ready for what, he didn't say. And in that silence, I understood something that shifted everything. This interview wasn't a test. It was a checkpoint. I thought my parents had written my story. Sitting there, staring at my grandmother's handwriting, I realized she had planned for this moment long before they ever made their first call. This version removes the coincidence risk without diluting mystery. The room stayed quiet while I broke the seal. Inside, the envelope wasn't a single letter, but a careful stack. Documents arranged the way someone organizes things when they expect them to be challenged. On top was a handwritten note. I recognized my grandmother's handwriting immediately. She didn't waste words. She wrote that years ago. She had worried about exactly this. About what my parents might do if they felt they were losing control. About how easily reputation could be used as a weapon in a town like ours. She said she didn't know when, or if I would ever need what she left behind. Only that if I did, I shouldn't face it alone. Beneath her note were records. Not accusations. Proof. Notarized statements. Copies of emails. Transcripts of phone calls. Sworn affidavits from people I hadn't spoken to in years, former neighbors, old managers, even someone who had once worked alongside my father. Different voices. Same pattern. My parents had been warning employers about me, calling me dishonest, telling them not to trust me. It wasn't one conversation, it was systematic. The CEO spoke then, carefully, like he was stepping into something that had already resisted him. My grandmother had been one of the company's earliest investors, back when it was still a risk. She had left these materials with strict instructions. If I ever applied and was rejected due to character concerns, they were to review everything before allowing the decision to stand. "It wasn't something we wanted to believe," he said. "That's why it took time." He looked at me and added, "We verified all of it." There was more. Bank records showed a small trust set aside in my name, not enough to make me rich, enough to keep me from being trapped. My grandmother's note explained it simply. "This is not revenge, this is protection." For 2 years, I'd believed silence meant guilt. That belief had kept me quiet, exactly as intended. Sitting there, holding those pages, I understood something heavier than relief. The system that erased me hadn't been subtle. It had just assumed no one would ever check. I thought this proof was meant to clear my name. I didn't realize it was also designed to travel, back through the same channels my parents had used. I didn't confront my parents. I didn't need to. The correction didn't start with a conversation. It started with letters, carefully worded, formal, sent to the same employers my parents had contacted years earlier, the same offices, the same desks. Only this time, the message came with documentation attached, not accusations, findings. The letters explained that false statements had been made about my character, that those statements were now documented as malicious defamation, that any hiring decisions based on them should be reconsidered. Some employers reached out to apologize. Others stayed silent. A few avoided me entirely, like silence could undo what had already been read. In a small town, correction travels differently than rumor. It doesn't rush, it settles. People started asking questions, not to me, but to each other. Why was I suddenly working at one of the most respected companies nearby? Why had the CEO personally walked me through the building on my first day? Why had legal notices appeared where whispers once lived? My parents couldn't control that part. They were called into a lawyer's office. From that point on, it was no longer a family matter. I wasn't there, but I heard what happened. Recordings were played. Statements read aloud. My father's voice, calm, confident, saying the sentence he'd once used to control me. Tell them she steals, she needs to learn respect. That sentence didn't sound powerful anymore. It sounded recorded. They tried to contact me afterward. Calls, messages, showing up unannounced. I didn't answer. I didn't owe them a reaction. The record spoke clearly enough. Now, when I walk through town, people don't look at me with suspicion. They look uncertain, curious, careful, and that's fine. My grandmother understood something my parents never did. Real control doesn't come from fear. It comes from patience and proof. They thought they were writing my ending. They didn't know she had already documented everything. If you want more stories like this, then subscribe the channel.